really good to have you here. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So my name's Amani Simpson. I am a youth leader and entrepreneur, and essentially I live to empower young people.
Okay, what's your organisation? What type of
It's
stuff?
called AVIARD INSPIRES, and we empower young people through media, events and personal development. Amazing. We have a music event, that's why I said music.
That's fair enough. So just tell us a bit about your story, because it's a very interesting one. So how did you get to this point? What inspired you to do this type of work?
I guess the best way to look at it is I failed my way to success,
Success, okay.
So I got kicked out of school. I went to uni. I was in care. I was in country. I did all the different things that I guess is, quite typical of someone that's struggling as they grow up, and ended up turning my life around. But then I got stabbed after that. So I got stabbed 7 times in one go. And in that moment, I had to evaluate. I thought I was doing well. So why was I allowed to get stabbed at that point? And essentially I had a really deep conversation in the ambulance with God that was basically like, I don't know if I believe in you. I've been going to church my whole life, and how could you let me get stabbed? And essentially the conversation I had in the ambulance was, I kind of got why I needed to be stabbed. I knew that they had to be a bit of a separation from the old person I was to the person I needed to become, the person you see today. Because essentially if I hadn't been stabbed, I wouldn't be talking about empowering young people. I'd probably be swanned off somewhere doing something a bit more selfish.
I'm going to take it back a little bit, because you've said some things where people who may be listening to this and watching this may well be surprised that you were somebody who was in church, which may for some people typically be thinking, okay, well then you're not maybe the stereotypical person who we see in the media, who are involved in youth violence, and you mentioned some terms like you went country. You might want to just explain what that is. So I'm interested, like, well, how does a church boy go from, being in church and doing all the stuff church kids are meant to do, to going outside of London and selling drugs, and then ends up being stabbed? What is that process? What was happening there?
It's a lack of identity. I think the title church boy, I understand, that it has particular connotations, but I think anyone can get caught up in that lifestyle because it's very attractive. And street culture will overpower near enough anything else that you come against, because it's what your friends do, it's the music you listen to, it's the way that we dress and the way that we talk. And there's positives in that, but there's also many negatives. So I wasn't counteracted with enough positives at that time. I didn't see enough positive young black men that had kind of come from similar environments to me and had made themselves successful. The people I looked up to were gang members and street criminals and stuff like that. And
so even though you were in church,
I was in church, I didn't.
These people around you.
It overpowered the church, because the church was something that I was going to by default. My mum would say, "Mum, Dad, let's go to church on a Sunday." It was a place of rule keeping, and it was like turning your phone off. When you're in church, you got to focus, you got to do Bible study, you got to do all of that stuff. And at the time, I didn't really understand the value of it. It was more of I'm just doing it because my parents want me to do it. And so, as I said, it kind of was overpowered and overshadowed by the street culture, I guess. It was very attractive. My first album that I bought was Get Rich or Die Trying by 50 Cent. And so that kind of gives you an independent...
Okay, so that was your motivation.
Yeah.
And that motivation was more than what you were listening to in church.
Kurt Franklin didn't do that for me, because at the time, I'm not talking to my boys about Kurt Franklin, I'm talking about 50 Cent's album.
That's fair enough.
So
yeah. And from there, so obviously it sounds like there was a motivation for money and like what comes of that. But would you say that you came from poverty?
No, not at all. My mum and dad, they did their best. Things weren't easy, but we lived in a pretty decent area. My mum grew up in Stoke Newington, my dad grew up in White City, and essentially he came over from Jamaica and moved to White City, and then moved from there and came over to North London. And so they did their best. They tried to.
But the point is, you didn't have holes in your shoes. It wasn't like that kind of thing. But yet there was still something.
It's a mindset. And so, when I was in school, although I didn't have the issues that some of my peers had, you don't see it like that. You just want to be like them. and you don't realize that actually you've got maybe a little bit of a better starting ground than some of your peers, and you know, essentially because you're following people that are also struggling with things and almost don't know where they're going at a young age, you end up kind of follow them off a cliff and you don't actually realize, you know, in that sense, you kind of just following them because it's fun to do in school.
But then the whole kind of idea of you going out of London selling drugs, how did that kind of happen?
So so the second school I went to, I got kicked out of 2 schools, and the second school I went to, I got caught up in some problems and essentially ended up robbing a kid. And after robbing that kid, I basically took a BB gun, I guess in a form of protection, and got caught with it outside my house by the police. And my mum and dad just said, look, this is the end of the line for me. And basically said, look, we don't want him to stay here. So they took me to care, and or like a secure unit. And so I was there for about maybe 3 or 4 months. And then I just met an older boy who kind of grew me and was just like, listen, like, let's go to a particular area outside of London. Do you want to make some money? And it was freedom for me. It seemed like freedom. It looked very attractive. I wasn't really money orientated at that time. I think it was more freedom and trying to find myself. Yeah. So he gave me a kind of older brother figure to kind of look at. And then just literally took me up there, kind of dropped me off in the middle of nowhere and was just like, here's crack, here's heroin, sell this and call me when you're finished and come back, so.
And that's interesting, like, you know, some people might be surprised to think that, okay, something like care is a place where you're getting groomed.
Why would they be surprised at that? It's a very vulnerable situation. You haven't got always there's a lot of people in a similar environment to you. And what I found there's a lot of broken people in care. People that have been let down by their family or let down by society or whatever the case may be. And so you kind of put them all in one house together and you start getting influenced by different people. You know, I had various different fights for no reason, just because we were angry young people in the same room together. It was, it was quite a dark place. Right. Yeah, and I can see how people can very easily get pulled into something that looks a bit more attractive because no one's checking for you. Yeah. You're your own person to a certain extent. Yeah, okay, they're trying to encourage you to be independent, but it's not your parents. Yeah. And it's not people that necessarily have that 100% love for you. Sure. You know, and so it's very easy for someone else to come in and almost slide in and sweet talk you to come and do something else. So
sounds like there was a turning point where you said you were stabbed 7 times. Obviously, we're dealing with something which is very traumatic in your life. So feel free to talk as much or as little as you want around that. But what was, you alluded to earlier on that it was when you was in the ambulance, that there was like obviously an epiphany moment. Yeah,
but I'd even take it back one step further. So I'd say that actually the first change happened when I was in at county lines or in country, where I nearly got arrested with whatever amount of drugs that I had. And I just basically made a decision to say, look, I can't do this anymore. Called my parents and they literally let me come home. And so from there, I started the steps of this change. It wasn't just that overnight got stabbed and, then I'm the person you see today. I changed at 16. I started to go to college. I started, this whole entrepreneurial kind of vision of starting a business.
And just before we get there, how old were you when you were doing?
16.
So going to country?
Yeah, 16. Okay. Yeah. So for me, as I said, the change was more so, I changed my mindset. So I started to read books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki and Think and Grow Rich and, all these different books to do with my own personal development. Before, to be fair, this is even before I got into church. So that was my own kind of foundation building in my mind. And then it's only when I got to the stage where after I got stabbed at 21, so this is between about 17 and 21 that I got stabbed. I got stabbed at 21, shall I say, sorry. Yeah. And it was only at that point that I then added the God element to it and my faith, because I had that kind of, that discipline and that, that vision and that self-belief to a certain extent, but I wasn't God-centered. And I feel like that was an important part that was missing in my life.
But just to be clear, it's obviously 5 years between like you're 16 and you're 21 now, you're doing some positive stuff. Yeah. Was it a situation where that life just followed you for you being stabbed at 21, or were you still in that process of just trying to get out of that life and it's never that simple?
I guess the best way to put it is put into the wrong situation, my true colours shone out. So essentially I got stabbed because I intervened in something that had nothing to do with me. So that's things I was doing in school. I was the hype person behind that wants to be part of the crowd. I could have very easily got in my car and driven off. I knew the person, but he had 5 of his friends, so I didn't need to be the person to save the day. But I wanted to do that at the time. And then when I came face to face with the guys that stabbed me in the end, I ran my mouth to the guy. You know, so I said something in kind of the moment, in the adrenaline, that basically agitated him. Sure. And if you're with a group of 20 of your friends and someone challenges you and you've got a knife, the first thing you're going to do is to think, how am I going to kind of show this guy that I'm stronger than him? And so that's essentially how I got stabbed.
Let's talk about the positives, because I've met you a couple of times. I'm always impressed with how you speak, but mainly because I think there is a real kind of drive for you to be excellent at everything you do. I think the way that you're challenging, I've been in meetings with you and you've challenged like local authorities, central government, and doing better for young people coming out of these situations. What do you think are I've got 2 questions for you. What do you think is some of the solutions to the issue we've got of youth violence? And also, the whole idea of Power to Fight is that we are trying to empower communities, whether that is community groups, whether that's faith groups, churches. You've said you've come from the church. What are some of the lessons, would you say, you're talking to a church pastor, what would you say that, we need to be thinking about around this issue?
I guess the first thing I'd say to you as a church pastor is, the same thing I said when we met is, you have a lot of the answers in your congregation, and I feel like sometimes the structure that church offers on a weekly basis doesn't allow for new ideas or for young voices to come through and actually shine through. And I think for us as young people, we don't really get to talk to our leaders. We sit there and get spoken to. Our parents will tell us this is what you have to believe. And then when we say why, it's don't question me because this is what it is. And I think definitely from my perspective growing up, I had a lot of questions. And even after I kind of, found God, I still had a lot of questions. I still had a lot of things I struggled with. So that's the first thing. It's definitely about providing a platform in these environments for young people to voice their opinions and to ask questions and to, almost be able to be empowered. And then the second thing I would say is, from a society perspective and from, us as organizations or youth leaders, is to make sure that the young people that are getting involved in some of these more negative side of things, the selling of drugs or the fraud and all these different things, that we teach them how to use these skills on the other side of the tracks. Because the reason why I was successful after I got stabbed, or partially successful in my own opinion, is because the skills that I learned from being on road, the diligence, the organization of your phone rings and you have to go and, meet a customer. When I built my property business, I took that from the street and I put it into property, and no one taught me how to do that. It was just learning as you go along and basically empowering young people to say that, look, you're going to make mistakes and things are going to happen, but almost providing them with that support network, because it is very hard on your own. Yeah. And it's very easy to say to someone, put down the knife and put down the gun and stop selling drugs, but what are they going to do otherwise? Yeah,
no, I think that's fascinating. Last thing, I've heard you use this term, learn, earn and return. Yeah. And I picked that up and I was like, no, that's good. Just break that down for us, because I think it's such an important concept when I heard you speak about it.
So came from, I have to give props to my god sister. So my god sister, Jamelia Donaldson, who runs Treasure Tress, she said it to me one day. She came to my house, and basically the concept, essentially it's us, especially as the black community, we always want to help others, which is great, and we have a really servant attitude about us, but a lot of the time we don't earn to be able to come back and really have those positions of economic, I guess, power to a certain extent. We have to kind of, please, can you help us fund our project? Or, please, let's do a GoFundMe, or, and I think that's great, but there's not enough earning before we return. We learn a lot just by being in the situations that we come from and the environments that we come from. And then a lot of us want to go and then be youth leaders, which is great, but we then work for an organization or a council who has the ability to shut it down and sever it and say, look, well, do you know what? It doesn't really work for our objectives. So thanks for your hard work, but see you later. And that doesn't help anyone. So we almost need to have a level of control over these projects. And essentially money is going to do that. And there's a lot of successful people around us, and not just the black community in general. But that's what I feel.
And that's really important. I think it's a great note to finish on. That ownership, I think, is really important in these situations. Amani, thank you for your time. I'm always watching with interest what you're doing as a young man. I think you've done amazingly well. Keep going. Don't give up. And really appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Nice one.
Thank you. Appreciate it.